The military archive building on Zephyr Prime stood like a monument to forgotten wars. Its gray walls held the memories of 1,000 conflicts, and today it would hold one more story. Commander Vexthul Kar sat in the small interview room, his 6 clawed hands wrapped around a cup of bitter stimulant brew. The liquid had gone cold hours ago, but he kept holding it anyway. The young historian sitting across from him looked nervous. Her name was Silandra, and she was barely past her first molting. Her chitinous shell still had the bright green color of youth, unmarked by battle scars or the dull gray that came with age. She kept glancing at the recording device between them as if it might bite her. "Commander Carr," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "thank you for agreeing to this interview. The Military Historical Archive wants to record the experiences of veterans from the human conflict. Your perspective is valuable because I survived," Vexthul interrupted. His voice was rough, like gravel being ground under metal treads. "That's what you want to say, isn't it? Because most of my kind who fought humans didn't come back." Silandra's mandibles clicked nervously. "Well, yes. The survival rates among senior officers who engaged in direct combat with human forces were extremely low. Only 12%. 12%. Vexthul set down his cup with a sharp click. "Do you know what that means, young one? It means for every 10 commanders who went to fight the humans, only 1 lived to tell about it. And most of those who survived were lucky enough to never see real combat." The historian pulled up her datapad, scrolling through files. "According to the records, you commanded the 47th Assault Fleet during the Battle of Kepler 442b. You were also present at the Mars campaign and the Luna Station siege. You saw more direct action against human forces than almost any other surviving officer." Vexthul's compound eyes focused on something beyond the gray walls. The memories were always there, waiting just beneath the surface. "You want to know about fighting humans?" "Don't. But Commander, this is for the historical record. Future generations need to understand what happened during the war. How we—" She stopped herself before saying "lost." "How we got our shells handed to us by a species that barely knew how to travel between stars." Vexthul's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you want to record for future generations?" Silandra straightened in her chair. The Coalition faced an unexpected adversary. The pre-war intelligence reports suggested that humans were a primitive species with limited military capability. No one could have predicted that we were idiots," Vexthul said. "That's what you mean. We looked at their technology and thought we knew everything about them. We saw their soft flesh and assumed they were weak. We heard about their emotions and decided they were unstable." The old commander stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, Zephyrian workers moved through the streets with their usual efficient purpose. Everything was ordered, logical, planned. It was the Zephyrian way. "Do you know what our biggest mistake was?" he asked without turning around. Silandra waited, her stylus poised over her datapad. "We thought war was about technology, about having better ships, stronger weapons, more advanced shields. We had fought the Krillians with their crystal ships, and we won because our energy weapons were superior. We conquered the Vorthek Empire because our armor was thicker than their bioacids could penetrate. We absorbed the Gentle Collective because our numbers were greater than their psychic abilities could handle." He turned back to face her. "Every war we had ever fought was won by having something better than the enemy. Better tools, better numbers, better strategy. So when we looked at humanity, we saw their primitive kinetic weapons and chemical explosives, and we thought it would be easy. But it wasn't," Silandra said quietly. "No, it wasn't." Vexthul sat back down, and for the first time, the historian noticed the deep scars that crossed his exoskeleton. They weren't the clean marks of energy weapons or the acid burns from biowarfare. They were jagged, rough scars that spoke of close combat and desperate fighting. "The first time I saw a human ship was during our initial probe of their outer system. It was small, maybe 1/10 the size of our smallest cruiser. Our scanners showed it had basic metal armor and used chemical propulsion. The weapons were kinetic projectiles, metal slugs fired by controlled explosions. Primitive." Vexthul picked up his cup again, staring into the cold liquid. My weapons officer laughed when he saw their armament. "Commander," he said, "they're throwing rocks at us." We all laughed. Even I laughed. What happened next? The little ship accelerated toward us. Not away like any sensible being would do when facing a force 10 times their size. Toward us, my tactical officer called it a suicide run. We powered up our energy shields and waited for them to ram us like some desperate last gesture. The commander paused, and Silandra could see the memory playing behind his eyes. They didn't ram us. When they got close enough, they fired everything they had. Those primitive kinetic weapons punched through our shields like they weren't there. The impacts shook our ship so hard that 3 of my crew were thrown across the bridge. In 30 seconds, that tiny human vessel disabled 2 of our weapon systems and breached our hull in 6 places. But surely your ship destroyed them in return. Vexthul's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Oh, we tried. We fired our main plasma cannon, a weapon that could crack a moon. Do you know what the human ship did? Silandra shook her head. It moved. Not with any fancy technology or energy shields. It just moved out of the way. Fast. Faster than our targeting systems could track. Those chemical rockets pushed that little ship through space like it was shot from a cannon. One ship couldn't have made that much difference in the war, the historian protested. No, you're right. One ship didn't make the difference. But that one ship taught us something we should have paid attention to. The humans weren't fighting the way we expected them to fight. They weren't following the rules. Vexthul stood up again, this time moving to a map of the galaxy that hung on the wall. His clawed finger traced the human territories, small blue dots scattered through what had once been contested space. After that first encounter, we thought we understood the problem. The humans were unpredictable. So we sent bigger fleets, better shields, faster targeting systems. We would overwhelm them with superior technology and numbers. The Battle of Kepler 442b, Silandra said, checking her notes. Yes, the battle that should have ended the war in our favor. Vexthul's voice grew quiet. We brought 3 full fleets. 97 ships, including 2 dreadnoughts. The humans had maybe 20 vessels defending the planet. The odds were in our favor. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. The commander turned back to face her. But not the way you think. We didn't lose because of technology failures or tactical mistakes. We lost because we still didn't understand what we were fighting. Silandra waited for him to continue, but the old warrior seemed lost in his memories. Commander, what happened at Kepler 442b? Vexthul focused on her again. That's when I learned the first lesson about fighting humans. They don't just fight to win. They fight like the survival of their entire species depends on every single battle. Every engagement, no matter how small, becomes a last stand. I don't understand. You will, he said, settling back into his chair. If you want to know what it's like to survive a war with humans, you need to understand that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. The humans didn't fight with better technology. They fought with something we had never encountered before. What? Desperation? Hope? Love for their fellow beings? Things we considered weaknesses, they turned into the most dangerous weapons we had ever faced. Silandra looked down at her datapad, realizing that nothing in the official records had prepared her for this conversation. Where do you want me to start? Vexthul asked. The beginning, I suppose, when the Coalition first decided to invade human space. The old commander's compound eyes reflected the cold light from the window. The beginning. Yes, I suppose that's where all tragedies start. With someone thinking they understand something they don't. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the archive building. Vexthul Carr prepared to tell a story that would shatter every assumption the young historian had about war, about humanity, and about what it truly meant to survive. Silandra activated the recording device, its soft blue glow indicating that every word would be preserved for the archives. Commander Vexthul sat back in his chair, his compound eyes reflecting the dim light of the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 30 cycles and memories that still haunted his sleep. The Galactic Coalition had been expanding for over 200 cycles, he began. We had brought peace and order to 14 species across 47 star systems. Every species we encountered followed the same pattern. Initial resistance, then negotiation, then absorption into the Coalition. It was efficient. It was logical. The old commander paused to take a sip of his cold, stimulant brew, his expression showing distaste for both the drink and the memories. When our long-range scouts first detected the humans, they were barely worthy of notice. The species had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 cycles earlier. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive, their technology centuries behind our own. What did the initial report say about them? Silandra asked. The intelligence summary was 3 pages long. 3 pages for an entire species. Vexthul's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. It said they were carbon-based bipeds from a high-gravity world. They had divided governments, constant internal conflicts, and used chemical propulsion for space travel. The report concluded they would be easily absorbed into the coalition. Easily absorbed, the historian repeated, making notes. The analysts noted that humans showed excessive emotional responses to stimuli. They formed strong attachments to family groups and showed irrational behavior when those groups were threatened. They were described as unstable and illogical. The report suggested they could be controlled through targeting their emotional bonds. Vexthul stood and walked to the window again, watching the orderly movement of Zephyrian citizens below. We should have read that report more carefully. Everything we needed to know about fighting humans was right there in those 3 pages. We just interpreted it wrong. How so? We thought their emotions made them weak. We thought their divided governments made them fragmented. We thought their attachment to family groups made them vulnerable. The commander turned back to face her. We were wrong about everything. Tell me about the first official contact. The coalition sent a standard diplomatic vessel to Earth. The ship was called Harmonious Purpose, and it carried Ambassador Zekthar of the Symmetrical Collective. The message they delivered was the same one we had used successfully 13 times before. Vexthul returned to his seat, his movements showing the careful precision of someone whose body had been broken and rebuilt multiple times. The message was simple. Join the coalition willingly, and humanity would be given a place in the galactic community. Refuse, and the coalition would be forced to impose order through military action. It had always worked before. What was the human response? They said no. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Not we need time to consider or we require better terms, just no. Ambassador Zekthar was confused. He had never encountered a species that simply refused coalition membership. Silandra looked up from her datapad. But surely they understood the consequences. Oh, they understood perfectly. The humans sent their own diplomatic team to meet with Zekthar. The leader was an elderly female named Sarah Chen. She listened to the coalition's offer, asked several detailed questions about governance and autonomy, then politely declined. Just like that? Just like that. But then she said something that should have warned us. She said, "We appreciate the offer, but humanity has learned to be suspicious of empires that promise peace through conquest. We prefer to manage our own affairs." Vexthul paused, his compound eyes focusing on something beyond the room. Zekthar reported that the human diplomat seemed unreasonably confident for someone representing such a primitive species. He recommended immediate military action to prevent the humans from developing better technology. And the coalition agreed. The High Council voted unanimously. It was supposed to be a simple operation. Send enough force to demonstrate coalition superiority, accept the human surrender, then begin the integration process. The entire campaign was expected to last no more than 10 standard days. The commander's laugh was bitter. I was aboard the coalition dreadnought Eternal Dominance when we jumped into the Sol system. The ship was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to sterilize a continent. We brought 5 escort cruisers and 12 assault frigates. It was the largest force the coalition had ever needed to subdue a single species. What did you see when you arrived? At first, nothing. Human space seemed almost empty. A few small ships near their outer planets, some orbital installations, basic mining operations. Our sensors detected their technology levels and everything confirmed the intelligence reports. Primitive kinetic weapons, chemical rockets, basic metal alloys. Vexthul reached for his cup again, then seemed to think better of it. Admiral Kirthon was in command of the fleet. He was a decorated veteran who had personally overseen the integration of 4 species. He looked at the human defenses and laughed. Literally laughed. This will be over before the next shift change, he said. But it wasn't. No. The first sign that something was wrong came from our communications officer. She reported that human transmissions had stopped. Not just military communications, everything. Commercial traffic, civilian broadcasts, even their entertainment networks. The entire system had gone silent. That's unusual behavior for a species facing invasion. Very unusual. Most species increase their communications when threatened. They coordinate defenses, send distress calls, try to negotiate. But the humans just stopped talking. Vexthul stood again, this time pacing the small room like a caged predator. Admiral Kirthon ordered the fleet to advance toward Earth. That's when we met the first human defense force. 12 ships, each about a quarter the size of our smallest frigate. They were positioned near what the humans called Mars. You must have outnumbered them significantly. We outmassed them 50 to 1. Our shields could absorb anything their weapons could produce, and our plasma cannons could destroy their ships with single shots. The engagement should have lasted minutes. Should have? The human ships didn't behave like any enemy we had ever fought. They didn't form defensive lines or try to protect their larger vessels. Instead, they scattered in 12 different directions, moving faster than our targeting. Computers could track. The commander stopped pacing and faced the historian directly. Have you ever seen a pack of Zephyrian hunting beetles coordinate an attack on a much larger prey animal? Silandra nodded. They move independently but somehow work together to confuse and overwhelm their target. Exactly. That's what the human ships did to us. They attacked from all angles at once, never staying in one place long enough for us to lock weapons. But the strangest part was their targeting. What do you mean? They didn't try to destroy our ships. They went after specific systems. Communication arrays, sensor pods, weapon mounts. They were surgically disabling us instead of trying to deal maximum damage. Vexthul returned to his chair, his movement slower now as if the memories were physically weighing him down. It took us nearly an hour to destroy those 12 ships, an hour to defeat an enemy that should have been swept aside in minutes. And by the time we won, 3 of our frigates were dead in space and our main dreadnought had lost half its offensive capability. But you did win. We destroyed their ships, yes. But winning, I'm not sure we ever really won a single engagement against the humans. Even when we killed them, they accomplished something that hurt us. What happened to the human crews? That was the first time I saw something that I would see again and again throughout the war. The human ships fought until they were completely destroyed. No surrender, no retreat, no request for mercy. They fought until their ships broke apart around them. Vexthul's compound eyes seemed to lose focus for a moment. But the strangest thing was what we found in the wreckage. The human ships were filled with images. Pictures of their families, their homes, their young. They carried these personal items into battle, as if having them close would make them fight harder. That seemed illogical. That's what we thought. Why would a warrior burden themselves with reminders of what they had to lose? We saw it as proof of their emotional instability. The commander leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. It took me years to understand what those images really meant. They weren't fighting because they were ordered to, or because they believed in some abstract principle. They were fighting to protect specific people they loved. Every human ship wasn't just a military unit. It was someone's father or mother or child, fighting to keep their family safe. And that made them more dangerous? It made them absolutely terrifying. Because when you're fighting to protect the people you love most in the universe, you don't fight to win. You fight until you die, and you take as many enemies with you as possible. Silandra looked down at her notes, trying to process what she was hearing. But surely the coalition adapted to these tactics. Vexthul's laugh was harsh. Oh, we tried. Admiral Kurthon called the Mars engagement a minor tactical adjustment. He said the humans had surprised us once, but it wouldn't happen again. We would be ready for they in the darkness of the archive room. Commander Vexthul's voice took on a different quality. The casual tone he had used to describe the early encounters was gone, replaced by something harder and more careful, as if each word had sharp edges that might cut him if he spoke too quickly. The approach to Earth should have been our moment of triumph, he began. The Eternal Dominance led our remaining fleet through the outer system, past the gas giants, past the asteroid belt, toward the small blue world that housed humanity's government and their largest population centers. Silandra could barely see the commander in the dim light that filtered through the window, but she could hear the tension in his voice as he continued. Admiral Kurthon was confident. We had taken losses, yes, but we still had overwhelming superiority. 1 dreadnought, 3 cruisers, and 7 frigates against whatever primitive defenses the humans could mount around their homeworld. What did Earth's defenses look like? At first glance, pathetic. A few orbital stations, some defense platforms, maybe 30 ships of various sizes scattered throughout the system. Our sensors showed the same primitive technology we had encountered everywhere else. Kinetic weapons, chemical propulsion, basic armor plating. Vexthul moved through the dark room with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate by sound and memory. But there was something different about the way the human ships were positioned. They weren't clustered around Earth like we expected. Instead, they were spread throughout the inner system in small groups. Some near Venus, others around Mars, a few hiding in the asteroid belt. Hiding? That's what it looked like to us. Small groups of ships tucked behind asteroids or in the shadows of moons. We assumed they were trying to avoid direct confrontation with our superior force. The commander paused, and Silandra could hear him settling back into his chair. Admiral Kirthon decided to ignore the scattered ships and strike directly at Earth. "Let them run," he said. "We'll deal with the cowards after we take their homeworld." That sounds logical. It would have been if we were fighting any other species. But humans don't run from fights. They run toward them. What we thought was cowardice was actually preparation. Vex Thul's voice grew quieter, forcing the historian to lean forward to hear him clearly. As we approached Earth, our long-range scanners began picking up something unusual. The planet itself seemed to be moving. Moving? How can a planet move? Not the planet itself, but there were massive objects in motion all around it. Our sensor operator reported that hundreds of large masses were changing orbit, falling inward toward Earth's atmosphere. What were they? Asteroids. The humans had been mining the asteroid belt for decades, using massive ships to move valuable rocks back toward Earth for processing. But instead of bringing them to orbital refineries, they were dropping them into carefully calculated trajectories. The darkness seemed to press closer as Vexthul described what they had discovered. At first, Admiral Kirthon thought the humans were planning to destroy their own planet rather than let us capture it. It seemed like the kind of desperate gesture we had learned to expect from them. But our tactical computer analyzed the trajectories and realized something terrifying. What? The asteroids weren't falling toward Earth. They were being positioned to fall toward us. Silandra felt a chill despite the warm air in the archive room. They turned their mining operation into a weapon? The humans had converted their entire asteroid mining fleet into the largest kinetic bombardment system anyone had ever built. Rocks the size of mountains, accelerated by gravity and guided by tiny course correction engines, all aimed at where our fleet would be when we reached Earth orbit. Vexthul stood again, his movements restless, but even that wasn't the worst part. While we were calculating how to avoid the asteroid bombardment, we started receiving transmissions from the scattered human ships throughout the system. What kind of transmissions? They were talking to each other. Not encrypted military communications, but open broadcasts that anyone could hear. Personal messages between ship crews. Families saying goodbye. Mothers telling their children to be brave. Husbands and wives promising to see each other again. The commander's voice became strained. They knew they were going to die. All of them knew. But instead of surrendering or retreating, they were coordinating an attack. The scattered ships weren't hiding. They were positioning themselves for a synchronized assault from multiple directions. How many ships were involved? 43. 43 small primitive vessels against our remaining fleet of 11 advanced warships. By every logical measure, we should have destroyed them easily. Vexthul returned to the window, though there was little to see in the darkness outside. Admiral Kirthon gave the order to engage the human fleet while avoiding the asteroid bombardment. Our ships spread out to avoid the falling rocks and began targeting the nearest human vessels. What happened next? The humans attacked. The simple words carried a weight that made Silandra realize something fundamental had changed in that moment. It wasn't like the previous engagements. This time, the human ships didn't try to disable our systems or avoid our weapons. They came straight at us using their chemical rockets to accelerate to incredible speeds. They were turning themselves into kinetic weapons. Ramming attacks? Some of them, yes. But not suicidal ramming. Calculated, precise impacts designed to do maximum damage to our larger ships. They would accelerate toward us until the last possible moment, then fire everything they had at point-blank range before impact. Vex's. Thul's reflection in the dark window showed the deep lines that decades of memory had carved into his features. The first human ship to reach us was a small patrol vessel with maybe 10 crew members. It targeted our cruiser Inexorable Logic, accelerating directly toward the ship's main reactor housing. Our point defense systems destroyed the human ship 3 seconds before impact. But the explosion happened exactly where the humans wanted it to. The debris from their ship, moving at tremendous velocity, punched through our cruiser's armor and ruptured the main reactor containment field. We lost Inexorable Logic to a ship that was already destroyed. The historian tried to imagine the scene, but found it difficult to comprehend the tactical thinking involved. How many ships did you lose to these tactics? 2 cruisers and 3 frigates in the first hour. But the losses weren't the worst part. The worst part was watching our crews react to what was happening. What do you mean? Our warriors are trained to fight honorably, to respect brave enemies and accept surrender when it's offered. But the humans never surrendered, never retreated, never asked for mercy. They just kept coming, no matter how many of them we killed. Vexthol's voice became very quiet. I watched one human ship lose its entire front section to our plasma cannon. The rear half was still functioning, still moving, still firing weapons. The surviving crew members could have ejected in escape pods. Instead, they used their ship's remaining fuel to ram our frigate-measured response. Both ships were destroyed. That sounds unfanatical. That's what we thought at first, that the humans were some kind of death cult that glorified meaningless sacrifice. But then we started intercepting their internal communications. What did you hear? Love, fear, determination? The crew of that damaged ship wasn't trying to die gloriously. They were trying to save their families on Earth. The captain's last transmission was to her daughter, promising that she would keep the bad ships away from her school. The commander turned away from the window and sat back down, the movement accompanied by the soft clicking of his exoskeleton. That's when I began to understand what we were really fighting. Not a military force motivated by orders or ideology, but billions of individuals who were willing to die to protect the people they loved most. How did the battle end? It didn't end. It just changed. As we were fighting the human fleet and dodging the asteroid bombardment, our sensors detected something new. Energy signatures from Earth itself. What kind of energy? Nuclear. The humans were detonating nuclear weapons in their own atmosphere. Not as weapons against us, but as propulsion for something much larger. Vexthul paused, and Silandra could hear the strain in his breathing. Have you ever heard of the Orion Drive? No. It's a theoretical propulsion system that uses nuclear explosions to push a spacecraft to incredible velocities. The humans had built one. A massive ship maybe 2 kilometers long, hidden on the far side of Earth's moon. They were trying to escape? No, they were trying to attack. The ship was accelerating toward our position using nuclear pulse propulsion. Our computers calculated that it would reach us in approximately 4 hours, traveling at nearly 10% of light speed. The historian struggled to comprehend the implications. A ship moving that fast would punch through our dreadnought like a needle through tissue paper. The kinetic energy alone would destroy anything it hit. And the humans were aiming it directly at the eternal dominance. What did Admiral Kurthon do? He ordered a retreat. For the first time in coalition military history, a superior force was ordered to withdraw from an engagement with a primitive enemy. Vexthol's laugh was bitter. But even the retreat. The archive room felt smaller now, as if the weight of the story being told was pressing in on the walls. Commander Vexthul sat under the harsh lights, his battle scars more visible than ever. Each mark told its own story of close combat and desperate fighting, but it was the look in his compound eyes that told Silandra this next part would be different. The colony campaigns began 6 months after our retreat from Earth, he said, his voice carrying a new edge. The High Council's strategy was simple: bypass the heavily defended human homeworld and capture their outer settlements. Force them to spread their military thin, then negotiate from a position of strength. That sounds logical. Everything about the plan was logical. We had identified 12 human colony worlds, each with populations between 50,000 and 2 million inhabitants. Most were mining operations or agricultural settlements with minimal military presence. Vexthul reached for his cup, found it empty, and set it down with a sharp click. I was assigned to Task Force 7, targeting a world called New Montana. Intelligence reports indicated a population of 80,000 humans, mostly involved in rare mineral extraction. The orbital defenses consisted of 3 small platforms and maybe a dozen patrol ships. A relatively easy target? On paper, yes. But we had learned enough to approach carefully. Task Force 7 included 2 cruisers, 8 frigates, and 40,000 assault troops. We were prepared for the kind of resistance we had encountered at Earth. The commander stood and began pacing again, his movements more agitated than before. What we found when we arrived was a ghost world. The orbital platforms were empty, the patrol ships were gone, and the main colony settlement showed no signs of life. Our sensors detected no energy signatures, no movement, no communications. They had evacuated, That's what we thought. Admiral Zekvar ordered a standard occupation deployment. Marine forces would secure the major population centers while engineering teams established coalition control systems. It should have been routine. Vexthul stopped pacing and faced the historian directly. The first transport landed in the colony's main square at 800 local time. By War 900, we had lost contact with the entire landing force. What happened to them? We didn't know. The transport's emergency beacon activated briefly, then went silent. When we sent a second group to investigate, they found the landing area empty. No bodies, no equipment, no sign of fighting, just empty. Silandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the archive's climate control. The humans were still there? Oh, they were there. All 80,000 of them. But they weren't fighting the way any civilized species fights. They had turned their entire world into a weapon. The commander returned to his chair, but remained on the edge, ready to move. The colony had been built inside and around a series of natural cave systems. What looked like a simple mining operation from orbit was actually a three-dimensional fortress extending kilometers underground. Every tunnel, every chamber, every passage had been prepared for war. How prepared? They had spent months moving their entire population underground. Not just the military personnel, everyone. Families, children, elderly civilians. They had stockpiled weapons, food, medical supplies, and ammunition in hidden caches throughout the tunnel system. Vexthul's voice grew quieter, forcing Silandra to lean forward. But the worst part wasn't the preparation. It was the organization. Every human on that world, from the smallest child to the oldest adult, had been assigned a role in the defense plan. Even the children? Especially the children. They moved through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels that were too small for our soldiers. They carried messages between resistant cells, gathered intelligence on our movements, and guided our troops into carefully prepared ambush zones. The historian stopped taking notes, staring at the commander in disbelief. You're saying human children participated in combat operations? Not directly, no. But they were part of the war effort in ways that violated every convention of civilized warfare. A human child would approach our soldiers, apparently lost and frightened, then lead them into a tunnel system where adult fighters were waiting. Vexthul's compound eyes reflected the harsh light as he continued. Our soldiers were trained to fight enemy combatants, not to suspect children of being intelligence assets. It took us weeks to understand that on human worlds there are no civilians. Everyone is part of the war machine. How did your forces adapt? We couldn't adapt. Our military doctrine assumed a clear distinction between combatants and non-combatants. The humans had eliminated that distinction entirely. Every person we encountered was potentially dangerous. But our own ethics prevented us from treating them all as enemies. The commander reached for his empty cup again, a gesture that was becoming habitual. The underground fighting was unlike anything in our military experience. The tunnels were too narrow for our heavy weapons, too complex for our communication systems, and too numerous for us to control. We would clear a section, post guards, and return the next day to find it occupied again. How were the humans moving through areas you had secured? They had built their tunnel system with multiple redundant passages. What looked like a single corridor might have 5 different routes connecting the same 2 points. They could move entire populations through areas we thought we controlled. Vexthul stood again, this time moving to a wall display that showed tactical diagrams from various coalition conflicts. Look at these battle plans, he said, gesturing to the orderly formations and clear objective markers. Every war we had fought before followed predictable patterns. Armies would meet, one side would achieve tactical superiority, and the defeated force would surrender. But not the humans. The humans didn't have armies in any sense we understood. They had populations that became armies when threatened. Every person was trained in basic combat. Every building was prepared for defense. Every community was ready to become a fortress. The commander traced one of the tactical diagrams with a clawed finger. On New Montana, we spent 3 months fighting for control of the underground complex. We had overwhelming firepower, superior technology, and numerical advantage. But the humans had something else. What? Time. They could afford to lose battles because they weren't trying to win individual engagements. They were trying to make the occupation so costly that we would eventually leave. Vexthul returned to his chair, his movement showing the weariness of someone carrying too many memories. Every day we remained on New Montana, we lost soldiers, Not to major battles or decisive engagements, but to constant small attacks. A sniper here, a booby trap there, an ambush in a tunnel we thought was secure. Guerrilla warfare. Yes, but coordinated guerrilla warfare involving an entire population. The humans didn't have a resistance movement. They were a resistance movement. Every person, every family, every community was part of a single defensive organism. The historian looked up from her notes. How did they coordinate such complex operations? That was the most frightening part. They didn't need central coordination. Every human seemed to understand their role in the larger defense plan without being told. They moved like a single organism with 80,000 minds. Vexthal paused, his compound eyes reflecting something that might have been admiration mixed with horror. I watched a human child, maybe 8 cycles old, guide our patrol into what we thought was a safe area. The child seemed genuinely helpful, even friendly. 20 minutes later, the tunnel entrance collapsed, trapping our soldiers inside while human fighters attacked from prepared positions. The child was acting. The child was fighting for its family's survival using the only weapon available, our assumption that children are innocent. And it worked. We lost 12 soldiers because we couldn't bring ourselves to suspect a frightened child. The commander's voice became strained. But the worst part was what happened afterward. When we finally cleared the collapsed tunnel and recovered our people, we found the child's body among the human fighters. The child had stayed to fight instead of escaping to safety. Silandra set down her stylus, unable to continue taking notes. An 8-year-old chose to fight soldiers rather than run away. That's when I understood what we were really facing. We weren't fighting an army or even a government. We were fighting a species that would rather die than submit. Every human, regardless of age or physical capability, was willing to sacrifice themselves to protect their community. Vexthal stood once more, but this time he moved to turn off some of the lights, leaving the room in a softer illumination. The new Montana campaign lasted 8 months. 8 months to subdue a mining colony with no significant military installations. By the time we declared the world pacified, we had lost 60% of our assault force. But you did win. We controlled the surface and the main tunnel entrances. But the humans were still there, deeper underground, waiting. Our intelligence estimated that maybe 40,000 colonists had survived our occupation. They had food caches, hidden weapons, and tunnel systems we had never found. What did Admiral Zekvar do? He declared victory and moved most of our forces to the next target world. We left a garrison of 5,000 troops to maintain control of New Montana. Vexthal's laugh was bitter. 3 weeks after we left, the garrison lost contact with Coalition Command. When a patrol ship arrived to investigate, they found the archive room had grown cold during the long night of conversation. Commander Vexthal sat in the dim light, his compound eyes reflecting decades of memories that still haunted his sleep. Across from him, Silandra had filled pages of notes with a story that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare and civilization. The final assault on Earth was the largest military operation in Coalition history. Vexthal began, his voice carrying the weight of approaching conclusion. 500 ships, 15 dreadnoughts, 100,000 assault troops, and weapons capable of sterilizing continents. The High Council had decided that if humanity would not surrender, humanity would be eliminated. Surely that should have been enough to overwhelm any defense. Any reasonable defense, yes. But we had learned that humans are not reasonable by any standard we understand. They don't calculate odds or consider logical outcomes. They fight until they win or until they die, and sometimes they choose to die in ways that ensure their enemies can't win either. The commander stood and moved to the wall display, pointing to a tactical diagram that showed the inner solar system. Our fleet approached Earth in 3 waves, spaced 12 hours apart. The first wave would overwhelm the orbital defenses, the second would establish space superiority, and the third would begin the planetary bombardment. It was a flawless plan. What went wrong? Nothing went wrong. The plan worked exactly as designed. We destroyed Earth's orbital platforms, eliminated their defensive fleets, and achieved complete space superiority around their homeworld. Within 18 hours, we controlled everything within 10,000 kilometers of the planet's surface. Vexthal traced the orbital paths on the diagram with one clawed finger. Admiral Korthek ordered the planetary bombardment to begin at 0600 Earth time. Our dreadnoughts positioned themselves to target the major population centers, industrial complexes, and military installations. The humans would have 6 hours to surrender before we began sterilizing their world. Did they surrender? They sent a single transmission. A human female, elderly, speaking from what appeared to be a government facility. She thanked us for the warning and politely declined our offer of surrender. The commander's laugh was entirely without humor. Then she said something that should have warned us what was coming. She said, "We understand that you believe you have won. We hope you will understand that we disagree. Please reconsider your decision to proceed with bombardment. The consequences may be more than you expect." That doesn't sound like a threat. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. But we interpreted it as defiance from a defeated enemy. Admiral Korthek ordered the bombardment to proceed as planned. Vexthul returned to his chair, his movements careful and deliberate. The first plasma bombardment struck the continent they called North America at 1200 Earth time. The energy release was equivalent to 100 nuclear weapons, enough to destroy everything within 1,000 kilometers of the impact point. That should have ended their resistance. It should have. But instead of the massive destruction we expected, something impossible happened. The plasma beam was deflected. Silandra looked up from her notes in confusion. Deflected? How? The humans had covered their entire planet with a magnetic field generator network. Not shields like we use on our ships, but something much more primitive and much more effective. They had turned their planet's natural magnetic field into a weapon. The commander's compound eyes focused on something beyond the room. The deflected plasma beam struck our lead dreadnought, the final authority. The ship was destroyed instantly, along with its crew of 8,000. We had lost our most powerful vessel to our own weapons. But surely that was an accident. They couldn't have planned. Oh, they planned it. The magnetic field network could be adjusted in real time, directing our bombardment beams anywhere in the solar system. The humans had turned our superior firepower into a weapon they could use against us. Vexthul stood again, pacing the small room like a caged predator. But that was only the beginning. As our fleet tried to reorganize and develop new attack strategies, we detected massive energy signatures from the surface of Earth. Nuclear energy, but not weapons. Propulsion. More Orion drive ships? Worse. The humans had built Orion drive platforms throughout their solar system. Not ships, but space-based weapon systems using nuclear pulse propulsion to accelerate projectiles to near light speed. They had turned their entire star system into a kinetic bombardment network. The commander stopped pacing and faced the historian directly. Have you ever seen what happens when a piece of metal the size of your hand impacts a ship's hull at 10% of light speed? Silandra shook her head. It doesn't matter how thick your armor is, how strong your shields are, or how advanced your technology is. At those velocities, a pebble becomes a planet killer, and the humans were firing thousands of them. How many ships did you lose? In the first hour after the projectile bombardment began? 67, more than we had lost in the entire war up to that point. Our remaining vessels were forced to retreat beyond the orbit of Mars just to survive. Vexthul returned to his chair, settling into it as if it was the only stable thing in a universe that had stopped making sense. Admiral Korthek called an emergency command conference. The situation was unprecedented. We had achieved complete space superiority, but we couldn't approach the planet we were supposed to conquer. The humans had made their homeworld untouchable. What did the Admiral decide? He authorized the use of stellar manipulation weapons. If we couldn't bombard the planet directly, we would destabilize their sun and destroy the entire system. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Silandra felt her mandibles click involuntarily. You were going to destroy their star? The Coalition had developed stellar manipulation technology for emergency terraforming operations. By introducing specific isotopes into a star's core, we could trigger controlled instabilities that would alter its energy output. Normally, this was used to warm planets for colonization, but it could be weaponized. If we increased the instability beyond safe parameters, the star would undergo catastrophic expansion, destroying everything in the inner system. It would take 6 months to prepare, but the result would be absolute. Vexthul's voice became very quiet. The order was given. Our science vessels began the preliminary procedures for stellar manipulation. In 6 months, the Sol system would become a graveyard, and humanity would be extinct. How did the humans respond? At first, they didn't. For 3 months, there was no communication from Earth. No attacks on our science vessels, no apparent reaction to our ultimate weapon. We thought they had finally accepted their fate. The commander reached for his cup, remembered it was empty, and folded his hands instead. Then, on the 4th month, we received a transmission, not from Earth but from a location near their sun. The humans had built something in orbit around their star. What kind of something? A device we couldn't identify. Our sensors detected massive energy flows, exotic matter signatures, and gravitational anomalies that defied our understanding of physics. When we asked what they were building, the human response was simple. What did they say? If you destroy our sun, we will destroy yours. Silandra felt the air leave her lungs as the implications became clear. They had developed stellar weapons of their own? Worse, they had developed faster-than-light stellar weapons. The device they built could destabilize any star in the galaxy instantly, regardless of distance. If we killed their species, they would take ours with them. The commander stood once more, moving to the window where the first light of dawn was beginning to show. That's when Admiral Korthek understood what we were really fighting. Not a species seeking to expand or conquer, but a species that would burn down the entire galaxy rather than submit to conquest. What happened next? The Admiral requested immediate communication with the High Council. For the first time in Coalition history, a military commander recommended complete withdrawal from an active campaign. The Council agreed, after a debate that lasted 3 days, yes. But not because they accepted defeat. Because they realized that fighting humans was no longer a military problem. It was an existential threat to every sapient species in the galaxy. Vexthul turned back from the window, and in the growing light his battle scars seemed less prominent. The ceasefire agreement was signed 6 weeks later, not a surrender from either side, but a mutual recognition that continued conflict would result in mutual annihilation. How did the war officially end? With the strangest peace treaty in galactic history. The humans agreed to limit their expansion and join the Coalition as an autonomous member. In exchange, the Coalition agreed to recognize human space as inviolate and accept human military advisors for all future conflicts. Silandra looked up from her notes in surprise. Military advisors? That was the humans' price for peace. They would share their knowledge of warfare and conflict resolution, but only to prevent future wars. They became the Coalition's conscience, the voice that asked whether military action was truly necessary. The commander sat down once more, and for the first time since the interview,